I'd like to pause a minute and just express our gratitude to our podcast sponsors, Noble's Food and Pursuits. This renowned restaurant group has been serving the community for an impressive 40 years, starting with Jim Noble's original restaurant, J. Basil Noble in High Point. Over the years, their passion for hospitality has flourished, leading them to expand into a diverse collection of 9 restaurants, a retail bakery, and a catering company. Today, we want to shine a spotlight on one of their beloved establishments, Rooster's, a Noble Grill, which has been proudly open for 31 years right here in Winston-Salem. Now, Rooster's is known for its commitment to offering a seasonally inspired, regionally cultivated menu featuring mouth-watering wood-fired meats, poultry, and vegetables. If you're looking for a delightful dining experience, they also host monthly wine dinners and provide live music on their inviting patio every Tuesday night. Now make sure to pay them a visit at 380 Knollwood Street, and to secure your spot, head over to theroosterskitchen.com and make a reservation. Again, that's roosterskitchen.com. Trust us, you won't want to miss the delectable dishes and warm ambiance that Roosters has to offer. Now, let's continue exploring the world of finance and uncovering some strategies to help you achieve your financial goals.
Welcome to the Semmax Way, the definitive podcast for mastering finance, investment, and retirement planning. Prepare to unlock the secrets to financial success as we delve into lucrative investment strategies and provide expert guidance towards a secure retirement. With over 20 years of experience, Semmax Financial Group has been dedicated to serving investors, and through this podcast, we aim to empower you with the knowledge to maximize your savings and achieve lasting financial freedom the Semmax Way. Whether you're a professional finance enthusiast, a high net worth individual, or part of a sophisticated investment group, this podcast is tailor-made for you. And now, here is your host, Matt Landon, financial advisor for Semmax Financial Group and licensed CFP.
Hello and welcome to yet another episode of the Semmax Way. My name's Matt Landon. I'm joined by Jordan Shinsky, and today we're going to talk about probably the number one thing that is on retirees' mind, which is around income. Am I going to have enough? How am I going to create it? Where is it going to come from? And there's so much that goes into this. There's risk, there's budgeting, there's an understanding of estate planning, there's legacy planning, there's, well, what about my spouse? If something happens to me, are they going to be okay? There are so many places we can take this that I really thought it would be helpful to bring Jordan in and the two of us to have more of a conversation and a dialogue around it, because I know this is the kind of conversation you have with your clients all the time.
Absolutely.
So let's just jump in. Where should folks start?
Good question. We got to figure out where you are today. Let's talk about what you're spending, right? Let's talk about what that's going to look like in retirement. If you come in today and say, I'm spending $5,000 a month. I've got a mortgage. I've got 2 car payments. I'm trying to put kids through college. How is that going to look in 10 years when you retire, right? Are you still going to carry that mortgage? Are you still going to have those car payments? Is school going to be paid off, right? Is it going to look similar to where you are today? When we talk about income in retirement, oftentimes we look at it 2 different ways. First and foremost is, are you going to be replacing your wages, or are you going to be satisfying your financial demand? Well, we have to know what that demand is going to be. So we have to talk about your budget. We have to talk about what your plan is, because sometimes it's similar. I ask a lot of people, say, what does retirement look like? Well, I can just turn off my alarm. I don't have to wake up Monday morning, right? Yeah. Everything else stays the same. Yeah.
Well, that brings up a great question then. So let's say I'm one of these folks that likes to be more prepared when I come into a meeting.
Okay.
How much detail do I need to have there? Do I need to bring you an Excel spreadsheet with every dollar lined out, or just a rough sense of what we're looking for? Or will you help kind of guide and understand that conversation depending on how, the range of what people bring in? Can you work with it? Or is there, are there certain key things you feel like are necessary to provide?
Well, there's a minimum that we're going to need. First and foremost, we're going to understand what sources of income will you have, right? So looking at, am I going to work part-time? When am I going to turn Social Security on? And these are all things that we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
Will I have a pension available to me? And if I do, what will I do with it? Will I roll it? Will I take it as an annuity payout? Right? Is there a spouse? Right? Are there multiple sources of income from other people in the household? And then looking at your spending and how much will satisfy those income sources how much does that satisfy? So let's say that the continued sources of income from Social Security, from a pension, maybe part-time work will satisfy 60% of my demand. Well, now we still have to satisfy the remaining of it to get you there. Where's that going to come from? We're going to have to take a look at the portfolio, determine whether there is a responsible distribution rate that can be met to satisfy that remaining difference, and kind of put all the pieces of the puzzle there. So really what we're going to need to start with, I get very long-winded, but what we're going to need to start with, we're going to need what income sources you're going to have. We're going to have to take a look at we're going to have to look at your statements, understanding what you have.
Right.
And then we're going to have that conversation around, yes, the more the merrier as far as information is concerned.
Mm-hmm.
If you do budget, which honestly most people don't, but if you do budget, bring that information in. Let's take a look at it.
So it sounds like if you've got a budget, bring it in. But if you don't, it just bring in your statements, bring in what you have, and sit down with an advisor and come up with it. So Not everyone has an advisor. Not everyone's working with an advisor. So in that case, you might want to take all these documents, spread them out on the table, and start thinking it through and looking through it. I know that sometimes working with someone can be so helpful because it lets you kind of pull it all together, and it doesn't become as overwhelming. Or you kind of know where to start and kind of say, okay, that's important, but less so. So it seems like when you start with a budget, that would help determine when to take Social Security, in your opinion?
Yeah, it's going to be a factor in it. Another factor is going to be, when do you plan to retire? When do you actually want to walk away from your job, right? Are you going to have any type of supplemental income? These are all going to be sources that are going to determine whether the appropriateness of Social Security, you take it when you retire at 62, or do I wait till 65? Or let's say I retire at 65, but my wife continues working. Then maybe I can defer my Social Security out to 67, or whatever the case may be. There are all different approaches to it. We just have to kind of talk through. And this is what's great about working with an advisor, is a professional is going to have the questions to ask, where an individual, like husband and wife sitting down at a table, dinner, trying to talk through their financial planning, they may not know what not to or what to ask that's relevant.
Well, and I think that's key, because sometimes the questions that you have, that is almost more important. I would say as important as the answer, right? Because just by raising that question, it causes a certain change in response. I know when I was growing up, my mom would look at me and you go, do you really need that other cookie? Well, the answer to that is no, I don't. And then I'm not eating that cookie. If that question had not been asked, 100% I'm eating that cookie.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's happening.
Yeah. Because I want it.
But just from asking the question, it kind of makes you go, wait a minute. That may or may not be important. Now, I know clients get hung up around the actual a lot of time, right? Yeah. You get one thing in your mind and you get so fixated on it that you are just dialed in on, well, this is my retirement age. I cannot take Social Security until then. Or this one thing is happening. I cannot make a change until then. And you kind of go, wait a minute, what about everything else?
Yeah.
And that question is, well, what if we took it 1 month earlier? What change does it have? Oh, it actually doesn't have that big of an impact. Well, okay, what about 6 months earlier? Well, here's how it changes things in a positive or negative way. Right. But I want to circle back around to something you mentioned a couple minutes ago. And I wrote down a couple notes here, and there's two of them, and I don't want to lose sight of either one. The first one is around a mortgage, because I know there's a couple ways you can handle home ownership in retirement. I've heard some people say, just maintain the payment, keep it low. Other people say, I don't want to have one at all. Or what, in your opinion, is there a perfect way to do it? Or what do you need to think through when we're talking about mortgage? Should I just go ahead and empty half my 401k and pay off the house? What do you think?
So ideally speaking, in a perfect world, yes, I want to enter retirement as financially independent as possible.
Okay. Meaning no debt.
Meaning no debt.
No car payment, no credit card debt, no mortgage debt.
Correct.
Independent.
There is a difference though between good debt and bad debt. And if I'm going to carry a debt into retirement, I'm okay carrying a mortgage.
So you would call mortgage debt more in the good debt category. Yeah. Let's dive into bad debt first. What's some bad debt?
Credit cards.
Okay.
Credit cards all day long. Get rid of them, tear them up. Don't use them if you don't have to.
Okay.
Credit cards will get you. I've seen so many people get into trouble with credit card debt. And as they're approaching retirement, you've got $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 in credit card debt at 18, 20, 22%. You're just killing yourself.
There's no way you can responsibly maintain a rate of return that is going to exceed what that credit card debt is amassing.
Correct.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, I would agree with you entirely. I do think that when we think about debt, we do have to think about it as a tool and who is it serving, right? Yep. I would agree. I think credit card debt is serving the credit card companies. There's actually a push to eliminate any of the bonuses and airline miles and all those kinds of things around credit card debt. There's legislation that's being pushed to eliminate that. And one of the reasons is because people will look at you and go, well, I'm getting credit card miles. And I go, yeah, but you've paid more in interest than 4 trips to Europe would have cost you on those airline tickets.
Yeah.
And you've never cashed them in.
There is a give and a take to that.
Right. People
who are responsible and use their credit cards, charge card, pay it off every month, right? If they're getting those points, that's a bonus, pat on the back, right? So if they eliminate that, there's no incentive there.
I actually learned there is a term for folks that have credit cards and pay them off every month. And do you know what that term is? I just learned this the other day. It's a deadbeat.
It's a deadbeat.
It's because they look at you and they go, well, "You're a deadbeat. You're not doing us any benefit.
You're not paying the company.
You're not paying the company. It's costing us something."
Yeah, but every
you're
time I swipe that card, they're charging 3%. So they're still getting paid.
They're still making something. Now you're not a total deadbeat because they're not having to come after you because you are paying it off.
Yeah,
you know, it's like that old saying. It's like that old joke. I can't remember who first said this, but somebody told me once. They said, "All right, you know what happens if you owe the bank $1,000? You've got a problem." But you know what happens if you owe the bank $10 million? The bank has a problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and so that's where it's like good debt, bad debt. Who's carrying it? Is this being leveraged positively? Kind of circling back around to that mortgage side, we're in a period where interest rates are climbing, but there's a lot of folks that have got really low mortgage rates.
Oh, yeah.
2-3%. Would that be something you would consider good debt?
Oh, yeah. And I would carry that through until the term's out.
Right.
If you have a low interest rate, and I'll use myself as an example. I bought my first house prior to the housing market collapse in 2007. I had a 6.75% mortgage rate on a 30-year. Okay. When I built my house last year at the bottom of the mortgage rates, I got it at 3.125. It was a construction loan.
You can make more having your money sitting in a T-bill than paying it off.
That's the point.
Yeah.
Is that I would be handicapping myself by trying to pay down that mortgage when that same level of money is going to give me a better return if I responsibly invest it.
So what you're saying is essentially you're using their money. They're charging you a little bit, but you're using their money to make a higher rate of return somewhere else.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the key thing around leveraging debt and the best way to maximize it.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that entirely. Now, the other thing that you mentioned that I want to make sure we got back around to was you'd kind of touched on it was distribution rate. Now, I've heard it called a spend rate, a burn rate, distribution rate. There's this rule of thumb that says you can spend 3 to 4% comfortably and not have to worry about running out of funds in retirement. Yeah. I've seen some people that go, well, wait a minute, that's how it used to be, but the stock market's been running great. You could pull 7% as long as you're all in stocks, or you don't need to be pulling more than 2. What's the place that someone should start when they're thinking about distribution rate?
So that rule of thumb of 3 to 4%, I will say this, reliably still holds true today. Okay. You don't want to overstress a portfolio trying to draw 8-10% a year off it. Because as you had mentioned, yes, the stock market has good years where you may get 10, 12, 15% return. But if you're going to go into the market to get those types of returns, you're also going to inevitably expose yourself to the risk of decline, like what we experienced last year. Now, there are ways to mitigate, minimize the downside of what a market does. But the more exposure you have to the stock market to accept a gain, the more you're going to expose yourself to a risk of decline.
Now, I know something that we do here that kind of ties into that a little bit is having different buckets, right?
Oh, yeah.
You've got different areas or different columns, if you will, that are supporting the house you're trying to build. So you might have one that is much more conservative and you're saying, well, I'm pulling 3 to 4% off, but I'm only realistically making 4.5%, 5%.
Yeah.
But that bucket is designed to kind of sustain itself.
It's designed for stability.
So it's not designed to try and chase those higher returns.
Right.
But then you might have a more aggressive bucket that as your needs go up with inflation, which we could talk about inflation for 2 hours, right? And I'm sure we're going to touch on it here in a minute. But I mean, when we talk about inflation, it's like, well, wait a minute. I'm pulling that same 4% out, but it's not going as far as it used to.
Yep.
That's when you maybe want to rebalance some of these other growth oriented buckets, kind of shift some funds around.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So when you're sitting down with a client who's come on board that's working with you, where do you start? Do you talk to them about risk? Are you talking to them about budgeting needs? Because I feel like if you're sitting down and you're talking to a current client, that's one of the key things you need to look at is risk and understanding, well, this one's not performing as well, but is it performing what we want it to do?
Yeah.
Right. Is it performing the way we intended it to? And then is it allowing us to be more aggressive with some of these other buckets?
So we have this conversation with all of our clients that we sit down with. And here's the way I look at it, right? And this is, I think, what's fascinating about financial services and what we do, okay, is that think about sitting down at your dinner table and putting together this 2,000-piece puzzle, right? So when I was young, we used to do like the 1,000, 2,000-piece puzzles as a family. We would always get together. We would sit down. We would have a place to start. You'd find the borders. Okay?
Absolutely. Get the flat pieces.
Get the flat pieces.
And if you find a corner, you're one of the winners.
That's right. There's only 4 on the board.
That's right. That's why you're the winners.
That's what we do with our clients. Okay. Is you've got all of this information and they're all puzzle pieces, and you put the puzzle pieces together and all of a sudden a picture starts to come out of it. Right. And so being able to sit down, yes, we talk about things like risk. We talk about what is your financial demand. We talk about your portfolio size, the expected rate of return that you're going to have to gain off of it. And we put all those things together, and all of a sudden this picture of, the potentiality of a future comes out of that.
You know what you made me think about? You made me think about the fact that I was visiting my great-grandmother before she passed, and she was living in assisted living. It was a kind of an independent facility with step-up units, if necessary. And we visited because there were puzzles all over the place.
Yeah.
But there was one that was upside down. There was somebody that would build the puzzle and they would just look at the shape of the pieces, and that's how they did it. They didn't look at colors. They didn't look at the overall picture. They didn't look at the lines running through it. They purely looked at shapes and they made it happen. And I asked them why they do it. And it's like, well, they do puzzles all the time. They said they got too good at it. They got bored. They wanted to do it the other way.
It was a challenge for them.
It made it more of a challenge.
Wow.
I would argue that there are people that are trying to put this puzzle together on their own.
Yeah.
Right. And I think when you don't know what questions to ask, when you don't know how some of these things interplay, when you're not able to look at it and see this is a red flag, this is a green flag, this is a good thing, this is a bad thing, this is an area of concern, this is something we need to work on. Right. When you're just looking at it all monochromatically, that's looking at, and you're trying to establish that puzzle upside down. That's the way I think about it. So you start with the border, you start with these edges. Okay, let's take this puzzle theme and just run it into the ground, if you will. Right. So you're starting with the border. That seems like the place to start then would be, around a budget, and then around a little bit of a distribution rate, a little bit of a risk conversation, making sure we're around there. And then we start to fill it in. Then we start to color it in. There's 2 things that I think weigh equally heavy at this moment in time on my mind. And I want to get your sense of where should people turn to next from a planning conversation. Should they look at inflation, its current impacts, its future impacts, or should they look at taxes? I'm putting you on the spot.
This is
because they are both important, but this is more of a order of operations rather than do we address it or not? Because you absolutely need to address both. But I've got my opinion, but I want to hear your thoughts around it.
I am even coming out of 2022 when we had the increase in inflation, what we experienced. I'm still going with taxes.
Okay,
I'm going with taxes because let me ask you this. In the next 10 years, the next 20 years, whatever down the road, do you, and this may be a loaded question, this is for the listeners, do you believe taxes are going to go down in the future or they're going to go up in the future?
Oh, I think we all know the answer to that question.
All right. I believe they're going to go up in the future. Okay. With that being said, that is something that has to be factored in to the planning process of a portfolio. Inflation, we have a track record of inflation. And yes, it's been up and down over the last 100 years. We've seen it as high as 13, 14% back in the late 70s, early 80s. Mm-hmm. Correct. We saw it hit 9.1% at the end of last year. Right now, it's back down to about its historical average. Over the last 50 years, it's averaged at 3.8% a year. The Fed target on that is to get it back down to 2.5%. So I don't believe that when you look at the amount of time that the inflation has been high versus the amount of time in history that it's been stable far more than it's been out. I don't want to say out of control, but out of acceptable ranges.
Right. I would agree with that, but I would put one little asterisk or one little caveat here around it. And here's the thing. I think when we're talking about tax planning, particularly if you have IRA buckets, non-qualified buckets, Roth buckets. And for those of you that aren't familiar with some of those terms, I feel like there's a lot of like jargon that gets thrown around a lot. An IRA account, let's put it in really, really simple terms. This is money you haven't paid income taxes on yet. A non-qualified account, this is money that you've paid taxes on it, but when it makes money, you got to pay taxes on what it makes. And a Roth account is money that, as long as you follow the rules, you don't have to pay any taxes on it or the growth.
Well,
right?
The original principle.
The original principle, you already paid taxes there.
Yeah.
But all of the gains, at no point do you have to pay taxes again. So with that in mind, I think making sure you have your risk balanced appropriately across your different accounts and addressing, okay, which account's growing faster, my taxable bucket or my tax-free bucket? Which one am I pulling income from today? If I need additional income down the road because of inflation, which bucket are we drawing from then? Are you going to get more bang from your buck having that tax-free bucket growing more aggressively? So I agree with you 100%. I think that inflation has to be part of your plan. It really does. Yeah. And especially right now, we're all worried about it. Right? It's in the news. It's in the headlines. You're hearing it. Because why are we so worried? Well, one, because you go to the grocery store and you go, is this going to happen forever? But two, you're being told to be. But I think the tax side, from an order of operations, from a what step do I take first? So step one, figure out your budget. Mm-hmm. Right? That's where, what do you need? Step two, now we look at it and we go, okay, now we know what we need. Well, how much can we pull? Where are we going to pull from? And then when we're going to be pulling these things, let's look at it from a tax advantage side. So how we're taking it. Then we dive into inflation, and inflation says, okay, this is something we're considering. This is something we're paying attention to, but it's also one of those just kind of facts of life. You got to deal with it. What about life longevity?
I've had a handful of clients that have come in my office, and when I sit down and I ask them what their retirement plan is, whether they want to leave a legacy, do they want to, give money to charity or whatever the case may be when they pass. And I get this, they say, I want to write my last check to the undertaker and I want it to bounce.
Okay.
The next question that I ask them is, you tell me when you're planning on dying and I'll make that happen. Longevity is this. Okay. I think prior to 2020, when COVID kicked off, the average lifespan of a man was 77. The average lifespan of a female was 78. Most of us are living longer than that. 50% chance in a two-person household that one of us will at least make it to 90.
Right. And so the issue with that average life expectancy is you get the one guy that had a hang gliding accident at 23 and the other gentleman that makes it to 104.
Right.
Right. Yeah. I would agree with that. I think we're living longer. Longevity is in our genes. I actually look at something kind of close to the heart. My mother was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease. It was a condition that as recently as like through the 90s, no one lived more than 2 to 3 years with this condition.
Wow.
It was a super short life expectancy because by the time that they named it, it was like you were usually later on in the process.
Yeah.
Well, now there's medications out and there are some side effects, but there are folks that have been living for 20 plus years with this condition.
Yeah.
That's huge.
That's
right.
Fantastic.
That's an example of modern medicine. In fact, HIV, getting diagnosed with HIV, if you were HIV positive in the 80s, it was
a death sentence.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
Now there's medications. Now you have to take your medication daily.
Yep.
But they get it to the point where it's no longer transmittable. It's not contagious. There's folks that are living with this condition. And I think that's a perfect example of life longevity. Now I would certainly, I wouldn't wish that on anyone. Yeah. I'm not hoping you get it, but medicine has afforded us certain things.
Right.
But along with that comes the question of, well, I'm living longer. My medication's more expensive. Mm-hmm. That I think ties back into the inflation conversation, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And budget, right?
Right.
So, and think of it this way. I'm going to be responsible. I'm theoretical, of course. I'm going to have my I'm going to be debt free when I hit retirement at 65 or 67, wherever the case may be. Let's take 65, right?
Okay.
I retire at 65 debt free. I'm living off of, let's say, $6,000 a month. I've got a picture. 20 years down the road, I'm perfectly healthy. All of a sudden I have a heart attack. I go into having quadruple bypass. I'm on a half a dozen different medications. Now all of a sudden I've got $60,000 medical bills that are coming in. My $6,000 a month budget all of a sudden is now $10,000 a month. That changes your dynamic significantly. So you have to be able to factor in any number of what ifs within our lifespan. You know, more than likely, as we age, if we are going to live longer, we're going to have more medical expenses. We're going to have potentially someone come take care of me, or have to go into a skilled nursing facility, you know, throughout the end of my days. And those are all going to have costs associated with them. My grandmother lived to 97 years old. The last 10 years of her life, she was in a skilled nursing facility. It was assisted living, but she had someone coming in daily to take care of her and help her take her medications and everything else. Sharp as a tack up here, but she had arthritis, and she, at 97 years old, she couldn't get around very well, right? So fortunately enough, my grandfather was a World War II vet, and he had passed, and she had his VA disability benefits. If she didn't have that,
that's a huge benefit.
That is a huge benefit,
because that's not something everyone has.
Nuh-uh. If she didn't have that, she'd have been paying $7,000 a month in care at that facility. Right. And that's on the low side today. That was in 2019.
Yeah. When you say $7,000 a month, I look at that and I go, well, that's a steal now. Yeah. Or that's a facility that you don't necessarily want to be in today.
No, it was a nice place then.
Because it keeps climbing.
Yeah. Now it's 10. I mean, and this is in the Winston-Salem Greensboro area. It's like $10,000 to $12,000 a month in some cases.
And so that's where,
crazy.
From a planning standpoint, we got to be thinking, well, if you're sitting down and you're 64 years old, when are you likely to need this? It's probably not going to be 5 years from now.
Yeah.
Right. So do you think we should count on 10,000, or do we need to have some kind of inflation built in there as well?
We have to talk about inflation.
Yep. So let me ask you this. Now, you're married, right? For those that don't know, share with us your wife, kids.
I've married 16 years, married my best friend, Sarah, and we got 2 kids. My son is a freshman in high school. He's 14 and my daughter is 10. She's in 5th grade.
So I want you to imagine that I'm asking this question to Sarah and how she would respond to it. Okay. Picture your perfect day in retirement and describe it to me.
How she would answer mine to be?
So now how she would answer for herself, and then you answer for yourself. Again, it might be the exact same thing, because it could be she says, you know, we're sitting at a beach house sipping tea, and you go, I'm sitting in a rocking chair right next to her in the mountains. And you go, wait, time out. But I mean, just kind of perfect day in retirement. What kind of walk me through the day?
Yeah, probably reading a book. She loves to cook. So it's probably doing pastries or some 5-course elaborate meal for 2 people. But she's very low key. So it's not, I'm going to go out and play 18 holes of golf sort of thing. She doesn't like the beach. So she's very homely, right? So it's very relaxed in our home, right? Me, I'm going to be outside all day woodworking, making furniture and digging in the dirt, and because that's what keeps me busy. When I retire, I'm going to have something to keep me busy. You know, so we're 2 very different people, but we can work well in retirement.
And I know you run the sawmill, and you do a lot of woodworking, but so she's over there making fresh baked bread, and then you're out there, you know, making a table that you're gonna be able to, you know, eat lunch off of, basically.
Right.
You know what jumps out to me about that?
What's that?
And what's interesting about this is you're somebody that pays attention to the markets. You're somebody that loves the numbers. You're somebody that enjoys talking about politics. You're somebody that enjoys looking and analyzing and all these kinds of things. In neither of your perfect days, did you mention jumping on your computer to see what the stock market did?
No.
Right?
Yep.
I think that's very telling.
Yeah.
Because if you're listening to this and you're thinking through, I want you to take a moment and think about your perfect day. Think about your spouse's perfect day. I think sometimes if you ask an advisor, what's your client's perfect day? You might go, oh man, steady market returns, good news report, good jobs report just came out. We're getting healthy. Things are going well. We just got positive news from a tax standpoint, you know, and we're able to do this thing that's more leverage. And I just saved them $5,000 in taxes. That's probably not the client's perfect day. That's probably not you. If you're listening, that's probably not what you thought of as your perfect day in retirement. This is why I feel like sitting down, whether it's with Jordan, whether it's with Michael, myself, and any of the other advisors, or your advisor that you're working with currently, right? because some of you are working with different advisors, and that's perfectly fine. That's what I think is going to be so key. This is why having these conversations on the front end are so important, because if you don't think through it, if you don't have a plan in place, it's like trying to build that puzzle upside down.
Mm-hmm.
You can do it, but it's going to take so much more time.
Yep.
It's going to be so much more difficult. It's going to take so much more mental energy. And then you're still going to have that question in the back of your mind of, does this really look the way it's supposed to?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where working with somebody can be so helpful. And so, do you have any kind of parting thoughts or words you'd like to share with folks that either have a plan and it could be a current client, it could be someone who isn't a client, someone who's looking at retiring. You might be 40 years old and going, well, I got a long ways to go. I don't need to worry about my retirement budget now.
That's when you start.
That's when you start. Okay. Yeah. What do you need to do? What do you need to start?
Talk to someone about it. Find a professional, financial advisor, a retirement planner, sit down and ask the questions, have a consultation, see where you are today, really think out where you want to be, and then have the conversation about it. And don't be afraid to ask questions. Absolutely. Ask everything under the moon. There is no such thing as a bad question. Honestly, no such thing as a bad question. Because if it's something we have to take into account and we have to plan for it, it's got to be part of that plan. Also, don't set it and forget it. Don't put a plan in place 10 years before retirement and say, oh, I've got a plan in place, I'm good.
Right.
Revisit it. And I mean over and over again, because in time, your plan is more than likely going to change. It may be subtle. It may be 2 years before retirement. I want to sell my house and move to the beach. I didn't plan that originally. It may be, well, I want to keep this place, but I want to buy an RV and drive across country for 6 months. Mm-hmm. Oh, that changes the dynamic.
It even changes in retirement.
Absolutely.
I would say that if you think, well, I made a plan when I was retired at 65 and everything's remained the exact same, probably not.
Yeah.
And it could be major changes with you from an income standpoint, but it could also be your tolerance to risk. It could be what you think is important and what you care about, or it could be news is coming out of Washington and we look at it and go, you know what? We were originally talking about doing some Roth conversions and staggering it, but we want to do a whole lot more than we were originally thinking right now, because that window is slamming shut. And just like Indiana Jones, we're going to slide under it before that stone slab slams shut. We're going to slide under it and grab your hat while you go. Yeah. Right. You know, we're trying to get everything we can. I think this has been an incredibly powerful conversation. I want to share one story with you that when you said start early is key. I actually talk about this in my book. And so it's something I'm going to share here as well. So if you've read my book or you're going to read my book, just bear with me because I'm going to tell it again. When I was 18 years old, I had been working in a restaurant while I was in school. So I was a high school student. I'm graduating. I'd been waiting tables. I was also working as a lifeguard, and I'd been putting a lot of money aside. Well, I had some money saved up and I went into the local bank that I'd been banking at since I was a kid. And when I was 5 years old, I loved it because they had suckers. As I got older, I loved it because they still had suckers. I'm a sucker for some sweets, right? It's like, I would love to say there was more thought into why I banked there. The reality was my parents took me there. And as I got older, well, you just keep going there.
They had dum-dums. That was good.
They had candy. That sold me. Well, I went in and I sat down with one of the bank managers because I told him I wanted to open a Roth IRA. I did not know how a Roth IRA worked. If you had asked me for the definition, I could not tell you, but I had been told it's a good idea to get a Roth account, open it, get it funded. So I went in and I had about $5,000 saved in my savings account from working all through my high school years. And I wanted to take $1,000 and I wanted to put it into a Roth IRA. Well, he looked at me and he said, well, wait a minute, you're a high school senior? And I said, yes. And he said, do you need a new car? And I think he might've seen the car I pulled up and I was like, I'm going to need a new car. Yes. And he's like, well, are you going to college? And I said, yes, I'm starting college in the fall. And he said, you don't need to open up a Roth IRA. He said, you need to have that cash liquid. You need to hold on to it. You need that money. What if something comes up when you're in school? Don't start a Roth now. You can always do that later. I walked out of that so deflated. Mm-hmm. I didn't march down to the next place and go, I'm getting a Roth account. I just didn't do it.
Yeah.
And I didn't start my first Roth account until years later. I think sometimes a little bit of good guidance, a little bit of good advice can set someone on the right track. A little bit of the wrong guidance can set someone years back.
Yeah.
if you're one of those people that has had bad guidance or no guidance, and you're thinking, what do I do? The place to start is to start.
Yeah.
Right. You know, I find when, what's that old saying? When the student is ready, the teacher will come. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, it's like when you hear these lessons and at the time you're like, I wasn't ready to hear it, but then later you are.
Yep.
Right. I think that's so true. I think that's so powerful. So do you have any kind of thoughts around that as far as like, what if somebody's saying, well, where do I start? Where's the very first place I start? I'm not 65 and needing a budget right now.
Yeah.
I'm not even 45 and I've been investing and trying to decide between a 529 or anything else. I'm walking out of college. You know, I'm walking out of school. I'm starting a trade. Where do I begin?
Two key things that my parents, my mom was a school teacher. My dad worked in a manufacturing center. We were very middle class. My parents, when I was in college, instilled in me two very important financial skills. The first is don't spend beyond your means or what you can't responsibly pay back.
Right.
Meaning good debt, right?
Mm-hmm.
The other is start investing early and let your money go to work for you. Very fundamental when you think about it, right? But there are so many people who, when they're coming out of school and they're starting their career, they're starting their lives, they're having kids, you can get wrapped up in the day-to-day and not think about, most people can't figure out where they're going to dinner Friday night, let alone what retirement's going to look like 40 years down the road. But if you sit back and you keep those two concepts in mind, very surface level, that will help you get on the right track. Okay. Start early investing and let your money go to work for you.
Absolutely. I think that's a beautiful thought.
Having a conversation with someone and feeling confident enough to sit down and just ask the questions is what is going to give you that starting point.
Yeah. I think that's so true because I do believe we can, as advisors, we can sometimes get so hung up on the details, which they matter, right? They really do. But if you're listening, I could take an hour and just talk to you about strategies around tax planning. And we're going to do that.
Oh, yeah.
Right. You know, we're going to spend some time we're going to do a deep dive going into how can we maximize this Roth account? How can we maximize this IRA? What are some unique things I need to be aware of? You know, what are some unique strategies around estate planning and tax mitigation? You know, there's a lot of really cool stuff there. There is so much we can get into in such a broad way, but I think sometimes it's important to take it all back to the very beginning. Take it back to the simplicity. Just start.
Yeah.
Start investing. I think you said it perfectly. Start investing, let your money work for you.
Mm-hmm.
And then along with that, if you're listening to this right now and you're thinking about your perfect day in retirement, right? And you realize it doesn't involve staring at the stock market every day, but either you are in retirement or you're getting close to it and you realize you're worried about it. I think, Jordan, you said it beautifully. Talk to somebody.
Yeah.
That said, we could keep going, but I don't want to wax poetic for too long here. But we are going to do another episode. We are going to talk about taxes. I'm going to bring Jordan back on. I'm going to hit you with more fun questions. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me on this.
Absolutely.
I really appreciate you taking the time.
This is great.
All right. Well, next time we're going to learn more about the kids. I want to know how you're okay. Talking about risk. How are you okay with your teenage son playing football? We're going to have to get into that.
Yeah, we'll have that conversation.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for listening. On behalf of the whole Semmax team, I'm Matt Landon. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Semmax Way. If you're not completely satisfied with your current financial advisor, give us a call for a second opinion. Please note that this podcast is intended for informational and entertainment purposes only. The content shared on the Semmax Way should not be considered as investment advice. It is always recommended consult your licensed investment representative and a competent tax advisor respectively for your fiduciary needs and plans. No statement contained in the Semmax Way podcast or made by its producers, sponsors, host Matt Landon, or Semmax Financial Group is a recommendation. Semmax Financial Group and Matt Landon are not responsible or liable for investment value loss of any kind from any action taken based on information discussed in the Semmax Way podcast. Any opinions or viewpoints in this podcast are shared for information and entertainment purposes only and are not financial advice. We do encourage you to conduct further research and seek personalized advice for your specific financial circumstances. Full disclosure available at semmax.com/podcast. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to having you tune in for future episodes of the Semmax Way.
This podcast is brought to you through our charitable partnership with Children's Home Society of North Carolina. Right now, there are more than 12,000 children living in the foster care system, and not nearly enough safe, loving homes for them. Find out how you can make a difference today at chsnc.org.